Welcome to episode 61 of The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. I'm Ken Ray.
I'm Nicholas Raba.
And I'm Nicholas Tacek.
For years, people labored under the misconception that Apple hardware and operating systems were immune to the threats and malware faced by people who use Windows. While the macOS may be stronger in some respects, what kept the Mac most safe was the fact that relatively few people used it. Times have changed. For most of the past decade, growth for the Mac has outpaced growth for Windows machines. General consumers have seen the light of the iPod and iPhone and decided to give the Mac a try. Students are choosing to take Macs to school. Businesses are giving their workers the option of bringing their own Macs to work or letting them choose which platform they want to work from, the Mac or PC. More people are using Apple hardware and software, and that is attracting the attention of miscreants, ne'er-do-wells, bad actors. While Apple has the attention of bad guys, it's got the attention of good guys too. People who've made jobs for themselves keeping your computing environment safe, or as safe as can be. People like Secure Mac. No, they don't just do a podcast and they don't just sell a suite of security software. Sometimes they find vulnerabilities. So what do they do then? Today we go behind the curtain, finding out what Secure Mac and security firms like it do when they spot a bad thing. So I guess the first question that I have is, how do you actually spot these bad things? Vulnerabilities. Do you use your own InfoSec knowledge? Do you wait for people to send them to you? How do you find bad stuff to notify other people?
Well, it kind of depends, actually. There are some security researchers who will go and look for vulnerabilities. There are either tools that they can use or their own analysis of the programs that they kind of will use to track down potential avenues that could be exploited as vulnerability. So that's one route. Another route is that you have customers report it, or you see it on a message board, or you see somebody posting something on Twitter, or you hear from friends and family. And as somebody in the information security realm, you go, hey, that sounds like it could be an issue, which leads to some research and generally is... you're pulling that first thread and everything starts to unravel from there as you dig deeper. But it really does depend. There are definitely security researchers who are more proactive in trying to find the vulnerabilities themselves. And there are others that it's almost like it's happenstance. They happen to be in the right place at the right time and with the right knowledge to identify, hey, this is a problem that is probably a bigger deal than most people would think.
I'm curious, when you say customers report it, I mean, what do people send you that you're like, oh, that sounds like it might be an undiscovered vulnerability, as opposed to, oh, that sounds like they left, their password written on a sticky?
I was going to say, we get emails all day long. So it's one of those, don't be afraid to send those emails in when you run into things. We don't automatically think that you're just super crazy or paranoid or anything like that.
Yeah, that is the thing, though. Like, as a security company, you do have to kind of go through those reports from customers, and some things can immediately be, well, I shouldn't say immediately, some things can be dismissed after a little bit of research as something that's either a hardware issue, like bad memory in the computer. It can cause you all sorts of crazy things. Sometimes it's just something as simple as the wireless mouse needs new batteries or the wireless keyboard needs new batteries. And that can manifest in, my mouse is jumping all over the screen. Other people have had reported that, and they're brushing the trackpad with their fingers when they're typing. And, it's stuff that actually isn't a problem, but you still have to take that step to make sure it's not a problem. There are... sometimes there are little red flags that go off when you're hearing from a customer. So they're saying, oh, well, ever since I downloaded this app, I've noticed this thing happening. Or, hey, when I use Safari and I try and go to this site or these websites, it's not working. And that's, a lot of times, at least for us, is more of an issue with malware. Other times, if our customers are saying, hey, I'm running your security program and it's not finding anything on my machine, but I think I have something, that's a time where we can do more research. And usually that's the case if it's a new variant of an existing piece of malware or a brand new piece of malware altogether that nobody's ever seen before. Those are more of what we would encounter where it's malware related than vulnerability related. But there are definitely security researchers out there that are more focused on vulnerabilities, more focused on malware. It kind of depends on where you fit into the whole industry.
And even remembering, like, when you are getting those drive-by downloads or things that are popping up for you that you go, wait, that doesn't seem normal, that doesn't seem right, and you do email your security vendor, try to remember the links, the web pages, and if it did download files to your computer, you could send those as samples too, not just going, oh, this happened, but I don't remember where it happened. Because when security researchers try to recreate and get files and things like that, the more information you supply, definitely the better.
That's one kind of another interesting situation would be, for example, this actually just happened this morning for me. My family member basically sent me a text message with a screenshot of. It was a pop-up he had on his iPhone, and it said, your iPhone is infected. It's got all this malware. You need to call this number, download this program, whatever. And he said, is this phishing or is this real? And I was like, it's phishing, obviously. And that's a situation, though, where depending on the action that a person took after seeing that message could kind of go in different routes. Yes, at that point, when it's just the pop-ups in there on the screen, it's just a phishing attempt. It hasn't actually caused any problem besides annoying you or confusing you. If you go ahead and follow through and you're calling that company's number or you're downloading that program and running it, that's kind of opening things up to potentially bigger issues. So again, situational, is it something unrelated to malware or security? Is it something that kind of is, but you didn't get far enough along for it to cause any problems? Or did you, is the cow out of the barn? Is everything on fire at that point?
I'm curious, do you have an idea, and if you don't, that's cool, but like what percentage of what you get is something that people actually need to be concerned with as opposed to, do you have caps lock on or something, as simple as that? I mean, do you more commonly encounter people who have just made some sort of mistake, or do you more commonly encounter something that's actually a threat?
It probably used to be 50-50 or slightly more people encountering mistakes, but over the past, I'd say, maybe 3 or 4 years, it's really changed because the people who are mostly the adware more than anything else on the Mac, those companies that are behind that are working day in and day out to create new variants or change things to avoid detection. And that is probably the biggest thing because they're being distributed through so many sites, so many different ways. And there are some commonalities that will tie things together, but at the same time, new variants are coming out all the time. So I would say at this point, it's more actual like new variants of adware than false positives, as it were, with somebody whose caps lock is on or their mouse needs new batteries.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious too, when you come across something in an application or in a bit of software, which I guess other people call that an application. Do you make a distinction between like a glitch and a vulnerability? I mean, like if something is not doing something the way it should be doing it, I mean, can you look at it and go, oh, well, that's glitchy code, or does that automatically make you think, there's something bad afoot here?
It depends on what the glitch is, like how it's behaving. If you're resizing a window, for example, in a Mac app, and one of the buttons doesn't follow the position in the corner that it should be, that's just something where the developer probably forgot to lock that button into resizing with the window. And that's just technically a glitch in the user interface. It's not really a problem. Sometimes you'll see some graphical glitches or issues like that. And those can be either caused by the developer or sometimes, especially with new releases of macOS, it can actually be a bug in macOS itself. Here's an actual glitch we've been encountering and other developers have been encountering. Right now in High Sierra, if you click the close button on notifications from, I believe, at least a third-party apps, I'm not positive about Apple's own app, so if you click the close button that would normally close that notification window, it performs the action instead. If you weren't clicking on the close part of it, you're clicking elsewhere to actually bring up the notification. So in our program, for example, if they're seeing an alert about tracking cookies being cleaned after they quit the web browser. Clicking close should close that alert. Right now, clicking close is opening up the program to the last scan log, which is the action behavior. And that's a bug in High Sierra itself, actually. It's not a bug in our program, but that is, and it's not just affecting us. There's actually a bunch of other developers. So there's a glitch right there that definitely is a glitch. It's part of the operating system. Hopefully Apple will fix it. Otherwise, we'll have to come up with a workaround. But that's not going to be causing, it's not a vulnerability. It's not a security issue.
Wow. That one's kind of terrible, though, because that's the kind of thing that you expect from some sort of malware or some sort of adware. Like you click to close and suddenly you've got 10 windows open.
Yeah, it was a little confusing at first to try and figure out what's going on because nothing changed in our code there. But yeah, so that was an example of where a new version of macOS can actually cause some confusion.
Okay, so Apple's Apple. I mean, you know that all of a sudden Apple has not turned chaotic evil and is downloading bad things to your computer. So you would say when it's a company like Apple, okay, well that is a glitch that is surprising from a company like Apple, but it's a glitch and we know that. If you go to like a smaller vendor, and that's not to knock smaller vendors because there are lots of smaller vendors doing wonderful work, I know. But if you go to a smaller vendor and you go to run their application and you're seeing glitch after glitch after glitch, does that make you think, okay, the front end's not looking so great. I wonder how secure the back end actually is.
That's definitely more of a potential. Again, dependent on what kind of glitches you're seeing. If you're looking at anything that has user input, if you're seeing a glitch when you're entering text into a text field and clicking a button or opening a file, something like that, something related to the program is doing something with external data, those are, when you're seeing glitches related to that, it's can be a good indication that it might not be handling its data input correctly, which is a prime candidate for a security vulnerability. So again, if it's just something silly like a graphics glitch or they forgot to hide a text field on a screen when you click a button, something like that, not as big of a deal. If you're entering text and you're getting some really weird error message, or if the app crashes after you enter a certain string of text and hit the return key on your keyboard, that could definitely be something more troublesome.
And a lot of time, a quick search on the internet, especially if you're dealing with a smaller vendor or even bigger vendor, some of the keywords like this happened or, window popped up along with the app name, things like that. You'll see other people discussing, whether it be on forums or different websites about it. So if other people are reporting that glitch, you're going to see a trend going on there, or even the ratings in the app review itself from some of the download sites. But if you're seeing a lot of really positive reviews, like super positive, and it looks like they're all made up, and right. You wanted to view that one video file or picture, and it told you that you had to download this viewer to be able to see it, and some weird glitchy stuff is happening now, and weird pop unders, and you're seeing terminals open in the background and different things like that. You may wonder a little bit more about what's going on there and if it's too good to be true. I mean, that's more on the level of trusted download sites and where you're getting your apps from as well.
And I think it's important to note that if you're encountering a glitch or a bug in a program on a repeatable basis, go ahead and take the time to report it to the vendor, because a lot of times vendors, they can test their program, they can do beta testing, and they can do all this stuff, but there are what are called edge cases with bugs, and those are, when you do something just right, it causes a problem, but it's not something that they necessarily would have thought to test for, and it wouldn't normally be something that would occur. But go ahead and report it, because if it is a security vulnerability, they'd usually want to get on top of that and get it fixed right away. Another thing to be aware of, especially in situations like if you're running High Sierra and you're noticing some glitches, make sure you're running the latest update of the app itself, because a lot of times developers will have to release a compatibility update to make sure everything is working correctly under the new version. So that is just something to be aware of, I suppose, before you go yelling that the sky is falling with regards to any specific app.
Yep, and pay attention to those emails that you get from the vendor, especially if your business runs specific software. Make sure that before you upgrade or update to the latest operating system, that your app is actually supported there. Even some major vendors sent out notices to their users saying, don't do the upgrade just yet if you're really relying on our application. So keep an eye out there.
I got one other question before we get to, we've actually found a vulnerability. Do you have, not to play on the name of the show, do you have a sort of checklist that people can go by? Like, okay, so I think I found this thing. I mean, is there a place either on your site or maybe we could put one up in the show notes where it's like, okay, so here are the things you want to look for first. Like before you send something off to Nicholas and Nicholas, or before you send something off to Apple, I mean, do you have a checklist or is there a checklist out there that people could turn to and be like, okay, well, is caps lock on? Okay. Am I brushing my mouse pad? I mean, all those things. And then again, you don't want to just receive an email from somebody that's like, well, this is broken, because then, I mean, automatically, and I know this has happened with a vendor that I used to work with a long time ago. I would write to them and say, this is not working. And they would, of course, write back to me and say, can you give me this, 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 and this? And it was almost always the same stuff, but it was the middle of the night and I was freaking out. So I would just write to them and say, paste it. Do you have any sort of general checklist that people should either check this first before you send it? And then, okay, so you've decided to send something. Here's the information we're going to need before we can proceed.
Well, I don't think we have anything on our site, but we can certainly provide something here and post it on the site. I'll skip doing the stuff like replace your batteries in your mouse, that kind of stuff, just because those cases where people are talking about weird mouse cursor stuff are not really a majority of the cases. Okay, so you're encountering a problem with the program, and you think it's a bug or a glitch or a potential security issue. Here is what you should do. The first step would be to make sure you're running the latest version of that program. Make sure you check for updates and install the latest version if possible on your operating system. The next step would be to try and see if you can replicate the bug. If you can make it happen every single time or almost every single time you take a certain set of actions, that can be really helpful for a developer in tracking down the cause of the bug and hopefully be able to find a solution rather quickly. Make sure you actually go ahead and take screenshots or write down the exact steps you took to cause the problem. When a developer's trying to replicate this in their lab, if they can follow this formula of here's what you do to cause this crash, it makes things way easier for them and they'll really appreciate it. When you contact the vendor, try and go through their support system if they have one, either a support email address or if they have a way to submit a support ticket on their website. That's generally the best way to reach them. Sending an email to their sales department or their webmaster when they have a separate support contact just means it's going to take longer for them to actually get back to you because it needs to go through whatever departments and end up at their support team. When you send the support inquiry, you want to include the version of the application, name of the application, obviously, especially if the vendor has multiple applications. So the name and version of the app that you're running into the problem with, the version of the operating system that you're running on your computer, and then basically the problem you encountered and the list of steps you took to cause the problem if you can repeat it. And then additionally, if the program actually crashed and a crash log appeared on screen, go ahead and copy and paste that crash log into a text file and give it to them. There's a button when those appear that's send to Apple. And when those go to Apple, if it's a Mac App Store app, it will actually end up going to the developer. But if it's not a Mac App Store app, it just goes to Apple and the developer, third-party developer, does not actually get a copy. So taking that extra time to basically copy and paste the contents of that crash log into a document to send to the developer can definitely help them track down the issue as well. And those are basically the steps you'd want to take if the company has any questions for you or they want you to try different steps to take or here's a new beta version of the program, see if that solves the problem. They're generally very happy to work with you in getting the problem solved as quickly as possible because obviously any sort of a bug is detrimental to their customers. So they'd want to get it fixed and working correctly again as quickly as possible.
And now I'm going to create a tiny bit of work for Nicholas and Nicholas and say to you that you'll be able to find those steps in the show notes for episode 61 of the checklist. So sorry, guys, but I don't know. It seems like it actually might be really helpful. And also, it'd be like, best practices to make your software vendor your best friend, maybe. And who doesn't want that in their coffee?
Oh, very helpful. And Nick, I mean, what you did here is you just created the next generation of better users contacting their support folks. I mean, every software vendor out there is very appreciative of you right now. But the one thing, now, whenever I call tech support, no matter how advanced or savvy I feel I am, they always have you reboot the hardware.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing I totally forgot. And actually, that's not a bad first step. Rebooting actually can help a lot of problems. Sometimes, especially if there's a process on your computer that's kind of gone a bit kind of running away with memory usage and it's used up all your memory, or for whatever reason you have incredibly large temporary files, anything like that can cause problems. If you're using your computer for a really, really long time between reboots, eventually things are going to get sluggish and there's more of a potential for things to go wrong, as it were. So, you don't have to reboot every day. You really don't even have to reboot. Personally, I'll reboot if I'm not installing an app or update or whatever that requires me to reboot anyway. It's usually about once a month on my main machine just because it's pretty stable as it is. However, if you're running into a problem where a program is repeatedly crashing, repeatedly causing problems, you probably want to take that step and go ahead and restart your computer completely and uncheck the little checkbox that says, reopen apps that were running when the computer's rebooted. Because if it's one app causing all the problems, you don't want to go right back to that same situation where one app is causing all these problems again.
Right.
So that might be a good step 0, actually, is when you encounter a problem, reboot your computer and see if it's still there.
Turn it off and turn it back on.
No, I don't want to ruin my uptime.
It's sad but true. Yeah. All right. So we've done all that. We've restarted our computer. We've checked all the goofy little things that we could check, that we should check, and we've actually found something that's really troubling. And we've got it to you, and now you've received it. And yeah, this is actually a thing. This is an issue. This is a point of trouble. This is something about which people might be worried. What do you do now? You as the security vendor, you as the company that I trust to if not fix it, at least tell me what's going on. What do you do now?
Again, I'm going to say this depends on the situation. If you are reporting a vulnerability, a security vulnerability, it's generally best that you're reporting it to the people who wrote the software. So if you're reporting a bug in macOS to us, Secure Mac, we would be able to contact Apple and get the ball rolling there, but it's kind of an extra step. You'd want to be contacting Apple directly. If you found an issue in our program, you'd want to be contacting us directly. If it's a piece of malware, however, you want to be contacting the security companies first and foremost. As we've stated in previous episodes, people have reported, especially if there's malware in the app store, they report it to Apple through the general channels, but those can be a little slow to get through their systems there, and it might not receive the attention that it deserves. So, so you've reported, let's say, a piece of malware to a security company. The first thing we'd be doing as a security company would be determining where it's coming from and locating a sample. Because you can say, I downloaded this program and it was doing weird stuff, so I deleted the app, but now I want to know if I'm infected with something. And there's only so much we can do at that point. I mean, we can analyze your system and we can check what we can check, but if you've deleted the file and you don't remember where it came from, that doesn't leave us with a whole lot to work with. So again, if you have that download link in your download history, or you happen to save the link, or you know exactly what website you went to find the problem app, or if you still have a sample, it's best actually if you have a sample of the installer itself. So that disk image file or the zip file, something that hasn't already been run on your computer, if you can send basically the original file to the security company for analysis, that's extremely helpful. So as a security company, once we can kind of at least find one point of distribution and locate a sample, either coming from a customer or one that we download ourselves from the malware distribution site, it's time to actually kind of get to work and start analyzing the malware to figure out what it can do. There are a number of different ways security companies can do so. You can run the malware on a virtual machine where it can't essentially harm your real files. You still want to be doing it normally on a test machine that's not separate on your network and everything else, because you don't want to infect yourself essentially on a computer that you're not expecting to. So that's one way to do it, to analyze kind of what network traffic it has, what capabilities it has. There are static analysis tools where you can actually dig into the low-level code of the program itself and kind of step through it function by function, and it would look like gibberish to most people, but there are ways to kind of understand what the program is doing from an analyst perspective. There are dynamic analysis tools where you're actually kind of running the program, but you've got the ability to make it do stuff at the same time. So you want to trigger a certain function or certain behavior, you can do so and kind of see the reaction of the program in real time. And that's basically a way to gauge the capabilities of the piece of malware, what it's doing on the local computer, what it's trying to download from the internet, what websites it's trying to connect to, is it trying to send any of your files somewhere, kind of gauging what the possibilities are as far as what it could be doing on infected systems. And that can help determine the risk level or the threat level that is posed by that piece of malware. The next step then, once you have an idea of what the malware does and you're pretty sure you've got the core components of it, you can go ahead and generate, as from a security company's perspective, you can generate malware definitions, which would detect that particular variant of the malware. And that varies from company to company. Some use machine learning, some use basically static definitions, some will analyze the malware in real time. If somebody tries to open it on the computer, the security program would go ahead and kind of cross-reference it against known code bits.
Really quickly, when you say generate malware definitions, you're not talking about so that I can go to a website and read it and understand it. You're saying generate a malware definition so that my computer or so that your security suite can say, oh, hey, no.
Yeah, thank you, because that's what I'm thinking as a security researcher. Malware definitions in the context I'm talking about are basically a file used by a piece of security software to determine whether or not a particular file being scanned is good or bad.
Right.
One way to think about it, I guess, would be in the sense that when you're getting like a flu shot, you're not actually being injected with the real flu. And this is kind of a stretch as far as an analogy goes, but it's basically a shell of the virus. It lets you know, it lets your body know, hey, this thing is bad. So right. in that regard, a malware definition file would contain kind of the shells, the important parts for identification of different pieces of malware without actually being infectious themselves.
Simplify it even further, though. I mean, basically, you could almost say that it gives it a temperature. Like, we know not to touch a hot burner because it's hot. So, I mean, the malware definition basically gives it like a temperature or like a sharp edge or something, right? So it tells your computer when it tries to go run that, hey, wait, that's hot, don't touch it. Or, hey, that's sharp and you'll cut yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's definitely one way of thinking about it.
That's so not technical. I'm sorry, I know that's not technical.
It works.
But it's sort of, it's illustrative, I think, or I hope.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So then you've got your basic protection in place that, your security program can now detect this variant, this piece of malware. And usually that's when you start seeing the bad guys respond and it turns into a cat and mouse game where the bad guys say, hey, my super sneaky piece of malware is now being detected. I'm going to release an update. And then it really does become a game of cat and mouse. Usually during that initial analysis, security researchers can kind of get an idea of the scope of domain names being used by the bad guys to distribute the malware. And from there, with research, checking the IP address to see if there's other domain names pointing to the same server, that kind of stuff, they can kind of start keeping an eye on the distribution sites. And then they'll go ahead and try and get the new samples when they come out. And then the bad guys, if they can figure out what IP addresses the security researchers are using, they'll usually blacklist them, and it's an annoying cat and mouse game, but that's really how it plays out. So it's repeating the same process over and over again.
There's another way that cat and mouse game can go, though, right? I mean, we've talked for over the past year of doing this show, year and change, about variants of malware that'll come out. So it's not just like, okay, well, it was being delivered from this place, but now that's shut down. There's also, I mean, you'll have a thing that's like, I'm going to make up malware. At least I hope I'm making it up. RoboPotato. So RoboPotato is out there, and we know that so now they've shut down RoboPotato, and then like 2 weeks later, hey, RoboPotato.a is out now. I mean, I'm assuming that we only call it .a because that's the first variant that's come out. But I mean, aren't there any number of ways that somebody could just, tweak a tiny bit? Yes. I guess the question I'm asking is if you've got a piece of malware, I mean, you almost know that the person who wrote that piece of malware is either already working on the variant because they know they're going to be shut down, or they already have the code, so they're going to be able to come with a variant fairly easily.
Yes.
I mean, how do you? I mean, is it really just cat and mouse from then on?
Yeah, to an extent, depending on how you formulate your malware definition for that particular original variant. Sometimes it can cover multiple variants depending on what the bad guys change. If they're changing something that isn't the same as what you're looking for with your security program, you should still be able to detect the new variant. If they're changing something to hide from your detection, however, if they're encrypting the contents of the malware, or they're changing enough stuff to make it seem completely different, those would be the case where you have to kind of track down that new sample, make new definitions. That's why security companies were regularly releasing malware definition updates to cover those new variants. A lot of times, actually, when security companies will find a variant, it turns out that there were, what they think is the first variant, variant A. It turns out, well, technically it's not, because there were these other older variants floating around for a while that nobody was aware of till a bit later on, when, oh, hey, we found this other website that's been distributing this other very similar piece of malware since a year ago, and nobody caught it till now. And a lot of times you'll actually see the bad guys are uploading their malware samples to a site like VirusTotal, which is used by security analysts to identify new malware samples and download them and work with them and add detection for them. And the bad guys use it to say, hey, is my malware going to be picked up by these antivirus engines? And so it's kind of funny because sometimes you can go back and you can see almost the development process for the malware, where you see the bad guys have uploaded samples in the past, tweaking it to avoid detection. And you find that after the fact, once it's been detected in the wild, and go back through those old samples and say, oh, hey, this was probably the same guy.
So now we're safe. Theoretically, we're safe now. You guys have come up with a way, or you've come up with a way to define the bit of malware. My computer is now safe and secure, but that's my computer. Or maybe, well, I guess what I'm trying to figure out is, how do we find out about these things, right? I mean, when bad actors take over a hospital, I'm using that term a lot today. When bad actors take over a hospital, that makes news. But then there's another piece of malware out there, and it's affecting some people, and you feel like, as a security vendor, you feel like more people need to know about this, be that, I don't know, businesses, general public, whomever. I guess the two questions I have are, how do you decide when a lot more people need to know about a thing, and then how do you go about actually raising awareness so that people do know?
Well, again, I feel like I'm repeating myself this whole time. It's situational. It depends.
I'm repeating myself this whole time saying bad actors, so don't worry about it.
Let's jump to, we totally found a new piece of malware.
Okay.
And we know that it's affecting people. We know how it's being distributed. We know it's out there in the wild. We release definitions for it. We're protecting our users actively.
Right. Which is great for your users, because, your users are protected, but then everybody else.
And there's different lists and groups within the community as well, because when one security vendor finds something, other security vendors are reaching out to their friends at the different companies going, hey, is this the same as this? Or can I get the sample of this? Everybody is looking because they want to protect their users. So when we get the sample, we release the definitions for it. Our research team is doing stuff behind the scenes, putting together technical details on it. So we're able to do a write-up on it as well to inform everybody on what the piece of malware does, how it's distributed, how to protect against it. And there's a lot that goes on behind the scenes there too. But part of that comes out to, emailing your users or posting something on social media saying, hey, this file being distributed here or this website here has been hacked. Make sure that you're not getting those files, or if you did get those files, here's what you could do to protect against them.
And that's kind of the thing, is like you can create all these definitions and play that cat and mouse game, but as long as the website or websites that are distributing the malware are still distributing malware, there's still going to be people who are getting infected by it. So there are a couple different things you can do, and it really depends on where the malware is being hosted. If it is being hosted with Apple, like on the Mac App Store, we would contact Apple and say, hey, you've got malware in the App Store, you should take care of it. Or if it is a developer ID application, so a third-party app that's not in the Mac App Store but is code signed, so the bad guy is a member of the developer program for Apple, you can, as a security company, we report the information on the code signature to Apple, and they can revoke that bad guy's membership and basically deactivate revoke his certificate, and then the program can't run on computers. However, if it's not a code signed app, if it's for those people who are still clicking, run from anywhere, or right clicking the application and opening it, things to avoid the built-in security of macOS, it's a bit more limited. If it's on a file distribution site, like Mac Update, we can contact them and say, hey, you're hosting a piece of malware with this particular page. Go ahead and you should probably take it down. And they're very responsive with that. However, if it's a website that's being hosted in a different country, especially one that has no reason to care, it can be a lot more difficult to get that malware distribution site taken down. And you can send messages to the hosting provider. You can say, hey, this person's, generally it's against the terms of service for a lot of those providers. Hosting malware is a no-no. So they can take it down. Other times, if it's a command and control server for a botnet, for example, there's usually coordination between a security company and the FBI or Interpol, whoever it needs to be, to get those servers taken down and out of action. So it really does depend. I would say it's easiest if it's being hosted in the Mac App Store or the iOS App Store, or if it's signed with a valid developer ID. That's probably the easiest to deal with, because it's pretty much as simple as contacting Apple and letting them know about it, and they will take care of the rest, as it were. When you're kind of branching out from there, it can become a bit more difficult to kind of take care of it. And the bad guy they'll still go ahead and usually create another developer ID account and pay another $99 and get right back in the App Store. But there's no easy solution for that one.
I'm curious, has there been a point for you personally where you're like, this is a big deal and the general public needs to know? I mean, do you then, well, first of all, has that happened? And then do you just rely on Apple to do that? Or do you personally, or have you personally reached out to sites like CNET, Apple Insider, places like that?
We have definitely reached out to sites before, and we've been the impetus behind takedowns of various pieces of malware. There's definitely a couple that spring to mind. A number of years ago, I think it was 2007, I want to say, there's a piece of malware, the DNS changer Trojan horse, that was affecting Macs and Windows, and on Windows it was actually affecting routers, and it was redirecting people to rogue DNS servers. So when they'd go to pull up a website, it was actually querying not your ISP's DNS server, not Google's. It was querying this third-party one that was injecting ads or stealing data, and it was really, really, really widespread.
Was that the one where you guys put out the free tool?
Yes.
And okay,
We
wow.
felt that one was important enough to warrant that. We worked with a lot of people. There was actually a consortium at the time that was helping coordinate the takedown. The FBI got involved. They ended up taking over the servers after the bad guys were put in jail. That was probably the first one where we were like, okay, this needs to be out there in the news because this is affecting a ton of Mac users. And they really, at that point in 2007, that was still the I'm a Mac, I'm a PC. Macs can't get any malware. And so that was a pretty bad one. There was another one a few years after that was stealing Bitcoin from people's computers. And that one, I think there was a guy, I believe it was on Reddit or something, and he was talking about how he had for better or worse, he was using Bitcoin as a investment vehicle for potentially getting a house in the future or whatever like that. And the bad guys had stolen something like $20,000 in Bitcoin from him at the time, which is worth a lot more than that now. Yeah. And that was one where we felt the need to kind of get that information out there, publicize. There's been a fair number of them over the years. We've released a few free removal tools. As needed, we've contacted websites to get malware taken down off of them. We've worked with Apple to get malware taken down off of the Mac App Store and the iOS App Store. It's definitely, again, not to be super repetitive, but situational. If you're talking about what seems to be more proof of concept piece of malware or something that's only half working or whatever, yes, we'll still let people know about it, put out, some information on our site. We'll protect our users against it. But it's almost like you can kind of tell there's definitely a threshold in mind when you're seeing that something can affect so many users and there's really nothing in place to protect them against it. And it's really damaging. And you'll see security companies who will say, hey, you need to know about this right away. One thing that springs to mind immediately was that attempted piece of ransomware, I think it was KeyRanger, a year or two ago when it was being distributed with one of the, I think it was Transmission, one of the torrent apps, and their website got hacked, which actually just happened similarly with a different piece of malware over the weekend. And that was a case where the company, a security company, saw that was happening and saw that there's a 3-day countdown on this particular piece of malware before it was going to start locking down people's files and holding them ransom. And it was like a Friday night, they did a press release. They contacted the company behind the program that had gotten, basically their website had gotten hacked. They told them. And the end of it was that people were able to basically get rid of this piece of malware before it could really trigger. I think there were very few, if any, people actually affected by it the following Monday when it was set to go off. And that was a case where the company really felt it was important. They weren't just looking, they weren't like, oh, we just need to sell our security product and we'll only protect our users. They wanted everybody to know about it. And they took a lot of steps for the good of everybody. They took those steps to let them know, customers or not, that there was a piece of malware that could definitely hurt their systems and to make sure that their systems were clean before it triggered. So it's, there are different things to do in different situations. And I think we've actually probably touched on almost all of them over the years with all the different pieces of malware we've seen and the ones that we've discovered.
The crazy thing is, when I asked you a minute ago if that was the one that you released a free removal tool for, that's when we met. Because you guys got news out, and I was like, hey, that's really cool, and I can't believe these guys released this for free. I'm going to give them a call. And I think that was the first time I interviewed you guys. And yeah, it's a decade, so I feel old. I don't know about you. So what's really cool about a podcast, I mean, aside from the fact that you can be like, hey, I totally met these guys 10 years ago. I mean, they're very convenient, right? I mean, you can do other things while Nicholas and Nicholas are dropping knowledge on you. But if you want something more in-depth, you want to be able to go back in and sort of dig a little bit deeper. If you want access to that checklist we talked about a little bit earlier, maybe follow some other links down the rabbit hole. The place to go is securemac.com/checklist. That address again is securemac.com/checklist. That is where you'll find show notes for episode 61 and the 60 episodes that came before. If you have a question that you'd like to ask or a topic you'd like to hear us hit, we do have an email address. It is checklist@securemac.com. That address again is checklist@securemac.com. And if you can't remember that, do remember this. You're listening to The Checklist, brought to you by Secure Mac. And we'll talk to you next week.